Welcome to a new edition of System Update. I'm Glenn Greenwald. This episode explores the unspeakably cruel and horrific tactic being used by the factory farm industry generally in the coronavirus pandemic, and Iowa Select Farms specifically, the largest pork producer in Iowa, to, in the jargon of the industry, depopulate, what everybody else would call mass exterminate, thousands upon thousands of pigs that they bred, but have now concluded have no commercial value and therefore all need to be killed at once. Now, this is an industry that has notoriously shielded itself in secrecy. They have used their leverage with state legislatures and governors and lobbyists to enact bills like ag laws that make it a crime. And so anytime we can bring transparency, or transparency can be brought by activists or whistleblowers, it is a huge value, a huge public service, a huge victory. And that is the case here this week. I'm joined by Matt Johnson, one of the lead investigators of the animal rights group Direct Action Everywhere, who hails from Iowa, he does, and has spent weeks there investigating this and has been able to obtain clandestine video footage of what actually takes place inside the barns to these pigs as these methods are being used, that were obtained exclusively by the Intercept to allow us to report on what is being done earlier today in a lengthy, detailed report based on DXE's investigation.
So this is the pen where they're going to load the trucks in and load the pigs in here, and they have it all sealed off, insulated, and they're pumping in steam from the machine outside, and they're going to roast the pigs alive in this sauna.
You can look in the barn and see the horrible conditions that they live in. You see it, and this is normal. This is the industry that we have. This is the industry that I've grown up around. Iowa Falls, Hardin County, Hampton, Grundy County. Everything around here. That is Iowa Select. That is big pork. Employee shutdowns caused massive backup. No places to put these pigs. Early talks kind of scared me about massive pig kill-offs of healthy pigs. Pigs that now are being killed for no reason. And the method to do that was through ventilation shutdown. Shut the pit fans off, shut the ventilation fans off, and heat up the building.
So, where was the camera at in terms of what was the range of sight?
It was pointed, it was in the southeast corner in the inlet, and it was pointed toward the steam hoses.
Could they see them?
Could they see
Could they see any on the gun?
I don't know. From the cameras, where the cameras were setting, it would give a view. It would give a view of the pen across from one side of the building to the other. I would say yeah.
What are the personal and professional risks that you feel like you would face if you actually came forward on the record in your name? Like, why have you decided that's not something you feel like you can comfortably do?
coming forward would cause a lot of pain and anguish with friends and family. And it's because this industry encompasses everything that is home. It was just, I guess, affecting me more and more every day, feeling the compassion and the empathy with these animals. What I've been witnessing with these pigs being killed, it's profit over everything.
And I'm also joined by an interview that we conducted with an incredibly heroic whistleblower who has long worked in this industry for Iowa Select Farms and is therefore trained to be inured to the standard cruelties of this industry, and yet simply reached the point of the limits of his conscience and then well beyond that as he began to see what his employer and what this industry was now doing in order to just get rid of and exterminate as many sentient, healthy animals as they could in the most cost-efficient manner possible. This whistleblower had originally resolved that, like others before him, he wanted to speak on the record, but then ultimately decided, with quite valid concerns, that this industry is so powerful in the state that he lives, that the reprisals, not just for him, but his friends and his family, would be almost impossible to imagine, as well as risking the livelihood of his family and himself in the middle of a pandemic where unemployment is at the rates of Great Depression. But he does speak with great authority and in great detail off the record, or at least anonymously, to help us understand what we're seeing in these videos and why it's so morally disturbing. Now, all of this was brought about by the particular circumstances for this industry, for the factory, food, and agricultural industry in the coronavirus pandemic. They suddenly found themselves with enormous stockpiles of what they regard as worthless animals, meaning animals that are market ready to the slaughterhouse and yet can't be sold, either because there's been an erosion of the supply chain because of coronavirus, or because many of their own slaughterhouses had to be shut down because they insufficiently protected their own workers from COVID-19 and therefore saw outbreaks of that virus in those factories. This industry is notorious for abusing labor and their workers, or because they just anticipated too much growth over the last years, bred too many animals, and now simply have no market in which they can sell them. And even as there are food lines growing in every major American city, people hungry because they can't buy food, this industry decided that their solution would be to depopulate, to mass exterminate these commercially worthless animals. And instead of doing so in the most humane way, or in a way that might be a little bit more expensive but cause less suffering, they've decided on one of the most excruciating and ethically dubious ways possible. The method that they're using at Iowa Select Farms is called ventilation shutdown. And in some sense, the name, although bureaucratic, conveys just how chilling it is. The tactic is described by veterinarian manuals, when done in full accordance with norms and protocols, is to purposely seal off all airways into the barn to make sure there's no oxygen going into the barn, and then introduce so much heat through boiling water or steam or humidity that the combination of the lack of oxygen and the extreme heat kills the pigs over many hours by essentially both suffocating and roasting them to death. And in the video that we published, you can actually hear the screams of anguish of these pigs shortly before you see the enormous corpses of them all piled up and then bulldozed away. Now, one of the more horrifying aspects is that the Select Farm whistleblower explained to us in the interview that before they began doing this in full scale, they were testing the procedure on various different types of pigs and basically failing. They were putting them in barns without enough heat, so they were air deprived and suffocating, but very few, if any of them, actually died after hours of suffering. And even now, that they're using a more advanced or effective procedure, it's still the case that when they leave them overnight and then come back in the morning, there are still pigs clinging to life or even surviving more robustly than that. And their solution is they have their employees go through the barn looking into the pile of corpses for any sign of movement and shoot them with a bolt gun. There are guidelines for how you depopulate unwanted animals, published by the veterinary industry of this association of this industry. And the overarching ethical goal, as you might imagine, is that whatever tactic you opt for should be designed to minimize, not maximize, minimize the suffering of these sentient beings. Now, in this case, with a barn full of pigs who you want to just kill as soon as possible, the most painless and quickest way in terms of how sudden the death is would be to just arm your employees and have them go one by one and put a bullet into the head or the skull of each pig and kill them, or several bullets. The reason they're not doing that, however, is because the mental health harms from having your employees go and engage in that level of bloodshed on that scale, the mental health harms would be insustainable. This is already an industry where mental health problems are very pervasive, and it's very well documented because these workers connect to these animals that they help breed and raise and then care for, and then they have to actually bring them off to their slaughter. And that process of connecting to and identifying with animals and then ultimately killing them is one that farmers have endured mental health problems from having to confront, but these workers doing it on an industrial scale, on an even greater level, have experienced such harms. And to then arm them and say, go shoot them regularly by the thousands is something that would be simply impossible to do. You couldn't have a stable, healthy workforce if you did it. And so they're resulting to what they call ventilation shutdown. And the anguish and pain and suffering of the pigs is both self-evident and obvious, as well as proven by this amazing footage that Direct Action Everywhere, through its investigation, has been able to develop, and that we've been able to report on with them as our source, as well as the testimony of this incredibly eloquent and natural whistleblower who simply, in a very non-melodramatic and non-emotional way, recounts what he's seeing, recounts what he had been seeing even pre-COVID-19 that was already disturbing him about this industry and the ethics behind it, but something that has just driven him over the edge where he can no longer withstand doing nothing about it any longer. One final point I think is really worth pondering as you watch this video that we've been able to put together based on the DXE investigation and listen to Matt Johnson in terms of what he discovered during his investigation, as well as the Iowa Select whistleblower, is the question of pigs and what kind of treatment we're willing to tolerate and approve of in the name of maximizing profit for the factory, farm, and agricultural industry. It's very fascinating that, and I'm certainly not the first one to observe this, that Westerners have come to really love their dogs and cats. They not only view them as members of their family, but they work to enact laws so that if anyone is even minimally cruel to a dog or a cat, they will be prosecuted and go to prison. There's been viral videos of someone kicking a dog on a street, and it provokes enormous outrage. And the idea of eating a dog is revolting to many Westerners, which is why there's so much indignation and disgust directed at Chinese wet markets and Chinese dog festivals or Korean dog festivals where dog meat is consumed. And it's very, very difficult to ever answer the question or even respond or to it or analyze it in a meaningful way. Why is it immoral and grotesque ethically to be cruel to dogs or to consume dogs, but it's totally and completely natural and morally acceptable to the point where we don't even think about it, to be incredibly cruel to pigs and to regard them as natural food that we consume all the time. The first animal story, the animal welfare story that I ever wrote was back in 2017 for the Intercept, where I wrote about what was a standard cruelty within the factory farm industry, not something like ventilation shutdown, this horrific aberration in the wake of the coronavirus, but something that is just completely the norm, where pigs are kept their entire life. They're bred in very unnatural ways to be incredibly large because they're more cost efficient that way, and they can barely stand and develop extremely painful ailments. Their lives are short and incredibly deprived of any meaningful fulfillment. They have no fraternity with other animals. They often don't even see the babies that the babies that they are forced to breed. And worst of all, they're in many cases kept in gestation crates. One of the most horrific inventions imaginable, where pigs are kept in a cage so small that they never in their entire lives are able even to turn around, not even to turn around, let alone go outside. And because pigs are so sociable and social and emotionally complex, they go insane. They start biting madly on the bars to the point where their gums bleed and their teeth fall out. The cruelty is manifest. Why is it that we view that as something we're willing to turn a blind eye to, when any minimal cruelty to a dog is something that provokes our indignation? And why is it that, as in this case, we're willing to either turn the other way or try and emotionally shield ourselves from having to confront the torture and suffering of these animals, which are, so much research shows, at least as sociable and emotionally complex and intelligent as dogs are? It's a really difficult moral quandary to grapple with, and I think it's one that the time has come to confront, given how widespread the abuse and torture of these animals are, and how central it has become to the way in which we consume our food. So I think that listening to Matt Johnson and then to the Iowa Select Whistleblower, who come at it from very different perspectives, but both very informed ones, are extremely illuminating and shedding light on an industry that goes to great lengths usually to keep what they do completely in the dark, even going so far as to make revelations a crime if done through certain standard journalistic means, which is what ag laws are, and now they're being struck down as unconstitutional. But this industry is as committed to ever to concealing from the public what it is that they do, because they know the public will have a difficult time supporting them if they know the reality of it. Just like the US government knows that about war, it has to keep the carnage and savagery away from public view, or the US public wouldn't support it. These kinds of groups like DXE and these kinds of heroic whistleblowers like this Iowa Select Farm employee who has stepped forward are doing an immense public service by letting us, the public, see the truth of what's going on, by shining a light on what's taking place in this industry, which is crucial for us to have a meaningful analysis and debate about the ethical limits we want to collectively set for how our food supply is created and disseminated. So as much as it might be difficult emotionally to immerse yourself in this topic, and as tempting as it might be to turn away, I know it is even for me, even after years of reporting on it, it's very difficult. It's really imperative that we not let the industry enjoy a one-sided monologue, but instead we have a debate, an informed debate, that requires knowing what this industry really is as opposed to their branding, and knowing what it is that we're tolerating when we sanction factory farming in the United States. So I hope you enjoyed the show. Joining me now to discuss all of this is someone who has been at the heart of the investigation that led to these revelations. He's a long-term investigator with the animal rights group Direct Action Everywhere. He hails from Iowa, so he's essentially back home while doing this work. Matt Johnson. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about the great work you've been doing.
Thank you so much, Glenn. It is an honor.
So as I indicated when introducing you, you do hail from Iowa. You grew up there, you're from there, but you now are based in California, which is where Direct Action Everywhere is based as well. So what is it that prompted you in the middle of a pandemic to travel from California to Iowa in order to investigate the factory farm industry in Iowa generally and Iowa Select Farms specifically? What prompted the concern on your part that there was something particularly important here to investigate?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, it was kind of a combination of factors, honestly, with the obviously the media justifiably is obsessed with the coronavirus, and that makes a lot of sense. So frankly, it was hard. My normal day to day as the press coordinator for Direct Action Everywhere, there's really not a lot of space for a lot of animal issues. So that was one thing that made it happen. But particularly, I heard about this so-called euthanasia method, so-called ventilation shutdown, which to my eye is the worst U.S. factory farm, systemic cruelty ever. And so despite its very benign sounding name, ventilation shutdown refers to closing down, so closing off the ventilation, the ventilation holes where air can come in and out of these barns, and then they seal them up with insulation, crank up the heat, pump in steam. And these animals, most often it's used on chickens, on poultry, but what we found was actually used on pigs, and animals are effectively roasted alive. And I think my reaction was the reaction of 99% of people, that this is completely horrific. And I just said, we have to do everything we can to capture this. And one thing led to another, and we've captured it. And I think it's something that we're very enthusiastic about getting out there into the public eye.
So as we know from a lot of the prior reporting we've done on this industry, as well as from the work that you've done, this industry goes to enormous lengths to conceal the realities of what takes place inside their factory farms and inside of their barns. They use the leverage that they have over the state legislature through lobbyists and through money, and in the case of Iowa, over the governor, to even enact incredibly draconian laws that criminalize all sorts of different ways of trying to get to the public the knowledge of what this industry does in order to produce the products that people consume, including the now notorious ag laws, which make it a crime to go undercover and then reveal what's happening inside of the barns, laws that have been struck down on First Amendment grounds, but they continue to kind of replace them or modify them, showing how important it is for this industry, what a high priority it is to conceal and to hide what it is that takes place. Now, you said in your first answer that you had gotten wind of the fact that they were using ventilation shutdown, the kind of thing that normally this industry would conceal, go to great lengths to hide. How is it that you found out about this enough to make your way to Iowa to go and investigate?
Yeah, I think you said it exactly right, that they do everything they can to keep it under wraps. And I mean, quite frankly, I would say that the exposure that it has received is not nearly enough, considering how horrific it is, how much of an injustice it is. But you do see some news articles. The Guardian talked about it in Newsweek, and there were several articles that were talking about this, and certainly in the animal rights community, it was a big topic of discussion. But yeah, it's something that the industry keeps very much under wraps, and to our knowledge, it's something which has never been caught on camera, and that's not by accident. It's something that's very deliberate, and the sort of things that we have come across in the course of this project, in the course of this investigation, show us that they're very, very much aware of what a horror show this is, and that they, even internally, even their own employees, people who are employed within animal agriculture, who are very comfortable with the concept of factory farming as a general matter, are horrified by what's happening, and these companies are desperate to get that message out there. So, it took a bit of digging to kind of learn about it, and it took a whole lot of digging to. We couldn't come across any video of it, but we were able to produce it on we were able to capture that footage on our own.
Yeah, so it's certainly not a surprise that this industry harms everything it touches, including its workers. This industry has one of the worst records, if not the worst, for labor abuses. We've heard terrible stories about how many employees in meatpacking facilities and industrial farms have been exposed to COVID-19 because of insufficient precautions, kind of a sociopathic indifference toward their workers, which is not at all new for this industry. We obviously know about
things like the great environmental harms that they impose on society through their dumping and their sludge, the public health risks beyond the coronavirus, through things like the overuse of antibiotics. But we also know that this industry is notorious for imposing immense suffering on animals on their way to the slaughterhouse, the way that they breed them to be abnormally heavy, causing them barely to be able to walk, the way they hold them in cages that are so small they often can't even turn around, just extreme levels of suffering that they endure for years at a time, the brutal and horrific ways that they've been killed. We know a lot of it because of the investigations that animal rights groups, including DXE, have conducted over the years and the work that you've done with journalists that have enabled us to report it to the public. So given all that, given all the horrific evils and suffering caused by this industry, why is this so much worse? I mean, we know that these animals are bred not to have great lives. They're bred to have short lives on their way to the slaughterhouse as soon as they're quote unquote market ready. So these animals are bred to die anyway. So why should the public care about this particular method of killing them or these particular methods for killing them? What makes this so much worse?
Yeah, well, certainly the industry norms as it is are plenty horrific. But yeah, with this coronavirus crisis, we've really seen the living nightmare that animals experience kind of even ratcheted up to the next level. And I would encourage people who have the stomach for it to check out the video footage that we have of this and even literally even just the audio. I mean, you just literally hear the audio footage of what's happening inside of there, and it sounds like a terror attack. Like it sounds like what would happen. It's just like mass pandemonium. These poor pigs are being cooked alive. It's just the most horrific thing possibly imaginable, and here we have actually Iowa Select Farms and industry veterinarians and even the media are touting this as quote unquote humane, and then they're using the word euthanasia, which refers to humanely relieving of the suffering of an individual. And I think that the footage and the audio speaks for itself, and it speaks to the depravity that this industry has been engaged in for a very long time, which through this coronavirus crisis, one of the silver linings is that depravity has just become so pronounced in so many ways that it can no longer be avoided.
Now, regarding this specific method of ventilation shutdown, the industry itself, or Iowa Select Farms itself, once they knew that animal rights activists were poking around, I think they probably knew that you had obtained clandestinely set footage of video and audio to be able to show the world what they were doing. They voluntarily on their own ran to their industry newsletters, but they ran to them to kind of confess ahead of the story that yes, they were using what they were calling very tragic and difficult methods to kill these animals. And their defense, their principal defense, is that ventilation shutdown is a tactic that is approved by good veterinarian practices, that they conduct these mass exterminations under the observations of veterinarians who approve the methods to ensure that they're ethical, both for their workers and for the animals, to minimize suffering and the like. Is that true? Do veterinarian guidelines sanction what it is that Iowa Select Farm has been doing in this case? And do the veterinarian industry in general approve of the killing of huge numbers of animals using these methods?
Yeah. Okay. So great question. So first of all, there actually are falling short of that standard. We have a legal opinion from a former federal prosecutor, as well as a veterinary opinion from a licensed veterinarian, saying that they actually have fallen short of that standard, because that the standard that you refer to indicates that under this VSD, all animals should be killed, or all animals should be killed throughout the entirety of the process, which isn't true, and 95% of animals should be killed within an hour of this process. Now, it's a little bit dicey with this because with how this process takes place, because we were in there the night before and it was already 80 plus degrees and it was already very humid. They were already pumping in steam. It was already very hot. Listening to the audio, you can tell these animals are suffering for many hours. And so the vast majority of these animals are certainly in a condition of distress for several hours. And even when they do really crank up the steam and crank up the heat and these animals are killed in this really horrific way, as I said, the standard calls for them to be killed, for 100% of them to be killed eventually. Well, these workers, as we can see on video, they're walking along. They're taking kind of a cursory look from side to side, seeing which animals are alive or dead. They have the bolt guns where they come through and they essentially finish them off, but they're not checking their pulse. They're not like really doing anything other than if there's a very obvious sign these animals are alive. And so there's a very good chance, I would say a likelihood, that we literally have pigs that have been through this entire process only to still be alive and thrown into a dumpster, crushed to death, etc. So, I mean, just unfathomable cruelty on top of unfathomable cruelty that falls short even of industry's own standards. Which brings me to my second point, is that the standards that they are touting are in fact the industry standards. So these are industry veterinarians paid, generally very well paid by the industry, and lo and behold, the industry veterinarians think that whatever the industry is doing is wonderful. And it's along the same lines as when ExxonMobil goes out and they pay some so-called climate scientists to come along and tell you that this is all a hoax and there's nothing to worry about with climate change and the fossil fuel industry is wonderful. But unfortunately, the media and maybe society as a whole hasn't quite caught on to the fact that is a similar dynamic. And so hopefully, I think that's something that this coronavirus crisis and this project in particular are really bringing to the forefront.
So I want to ask you about the employees who are at this facility or other facilities who are being forced to use methods that are gruesome, no matter how inured you are to the brutality and savagery and barbarism of this industry. Obviously, the people who work there are people who are accustomed to leading animals that they care for off to slaughter. There are studies about how difficult that can be for mental health, how emotionally difficult that can be. One need not work too hard to imagine what that's like. And yet, in this case, they're being asked to do something so far beyond even what they're trained to do psychologically and mentally. Did you have the chance, while you've been in Iowa and poking around and investigating these facilities, to talk to some of the workers, the employees, about how they are handling this work that they're being required to do and how they're reacting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, this very investigation was only made possible because of this brave whistleblower who came forward to us. This was actually following a prior DXE investigation that exposed the cruelty at this Iowa State senator's pig farm. He was the state senator behind Iowa's most recent ag gag law. And this whistleblower came forward to us and said, well, there was this overcrowding at the senator's farm, but what Iowa Select Farms is doing on a regular basis is actually above and beyond the crowding that we saw there. And that really just kind of got that conversation started. This was actually before coronavirus, and that whole crisis has bared down on us and obviously exacerbated the cruelty towards animals and many other impacts. And but even beyond that, with the process of this investigation, for example, when we went to the farm and we confronted the company's chief operating officer, his name is Noel Williams, there were other workers there at the farm, and they said to us, yeah, this is shitty, it's terrible, like this kind of thing. These are their words. So they clearly don't want to be a part of this either. And, unfortunately, they kind of feel like they don't have a choice. And that's obviously is extremely unfortunate. We also know that internally the company is, or has been seeking to downplay this because they know that this is really horrible stuff for anybody to be involved with in any way or even know about. And at Direct Action Everywhere, obviously, we're very much interested in whistleblowers coming forward. We have a website where people can submit their footage and video and information anonymously if you choose. You can also, of course, choose to be public. That's the URL there is dxe.io/whistle. And actually, one other thing, there is this other group I know that's launching this week that I know the Intercept is covering called Counterglow. This group actually mapped out tens of thousands of factory farms throughout the U.S. This is information that the industry has been seeking and often using litigation to try to suppress this information for literally decades. But now this information is out there, and it's also this platform where whistleblowers, everyday people like these workers, can come forward and compile this kind of information about what's going on at these places into one place. So definitely encourage folks to check that out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We always encourage whistleblowers as well as journalists to come forward and try and provide them all the protection that they need to stay anonymous if they choose. It's incredibly important, especially for an industry like this that uses its power to keep hidden what their practices are. So let me conclude with a question related both to that and to your earlier explanation. Let me ask you about that same dynamic as it applies to the political process in Iowa. Obviously, animal agriculture and factory farms are an incredibly important and therefore powerful lobby in Iowa. What has been, in some of the interviews that we've conducted, people have said there's just no point in even notifying the government about regulatory abuses or abuses in the treatment of animals because they're just an arm of the corporation. There's zero chance they're going to do anything. What do you know about that? What do you know about how captive the government, the democratically elected government, the governor and the Iowa state legislature is to this industry?
Yeah, I think it's really out in the open air for anybody who's bothering to pay attention. I mean, you look at Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. She's doing press conferences related to the coronavirus 5 days a week. She certainly never says a word about animal well-being. And when it comes to the human suffering, she'll occasionally get a question about slaughterhouse workers, that sort of a thing. And she is very quick to deflect, very quick to, let me get back to you on that. At a Tyson facility in Iowa, it took over a week for OSHA to respond to complaints of coronavirus, literally people dying, and Tyson as a company was even longer than that to respond, and her response to that was, let me check on that, I'll get back to you, not saying a public word about it. Well, I think that, based upon just that bit of information, you can say something a little stronger than that. And lo and behold, behind the scenes, she's taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from all these big meat industries. As the Intercept is covered, she's very cozy, very good friends, not only taking money, but personally seems to be very close friends with the folks with Iowa Select Farms. So, we kind of know that this is unfortunately the way that business gets done. And, once again, I really hope that what we can do here is to elevate the public consciousness, where I think people are very aware of this sort of dynamic that's extremely problematic in the fossil fuel industry and the pharmaceutical industry and so on. But in animal agriculture, it's every bit as corrupt and every bit as much of an issue, and something that we should be standing up against. I mean, this is an industry that really serves nobody. Like, why are we not why does this industry even need to exist, quite frankly? For ordinary people, it's just going to be better. It's better for animals, it's better for the environment, it's better for public health, it's better for not ushering in the next pandemic. I mean, the food alternatives are there. So, I mean, this really isn't a matter of what's possible, it's a matter of what's prioritized. And frankly, the public should be standing up as one and say, why the heck are we not regulating this industry? Why the heck are we sending all this money to this industry, which frankly would be a number one candidate for a massive tax to the extent that it even still exists? And at the end of the day, I mean, this industry just needs to be on its way out, and we need to usher in all these alternatives that exist that are just frankly superior in every way.
Well, Matt, as a journalist who's covered all kinds of terrible injustices and writes about war and the like, this is among the most difficult work for me, because you have to delve into and confront these absolutely horrific practices, this just unspeakable cruelty. And I know for you and for your colleagues at DXE, it's infinitely worse because you're much closer to it. You're around it all the time. You're immersed in it. And then beyond that, you're also risking and sacrificing your own individual liberty. Some of these laws, criminal laws, are very draconian. Most of you face multiple felony prosecutions in various states simply for trying to get the word out to the public to no benefit of yourself, only to the public, the crimes of this industry. So I really appreciate you're taking the time in the middle of this investigation to fill us in on what you've discovered, but also I'm really grateful for the work that you and DXE are doing in general to try and shine some light on what is a very transparency-averse sector of our society, and yet a really consequential one. So thanks so much for that.
Really early this year, I'd been kind of getting these thoughts about the constant overcrowding that I'd seen at work, and it had just been going on for so long. Iowa Select Farms has gone from 1 billion pounds of pork production to upwards of 2.5 billion this year projected. Now, with those massive growth numbers came a lot of issues with production, meaning pigs were overcrowded in a barn. Pigs were overcrowded when they shouldn't have been. It's immoral. It's just hard to see every single day. Now we're seeing that over the course of 5+ years, That and understanding all the intricacies of this pork production company. It just really got to weighing on me. And so right here at the beginning of the year, early March, I got a hold of Direct Action Everywhere. After reading an article that they had done here in the state in regards to Iowa State Senator Ken Rosenboom's own personal hog farm, it kind of struck with me. Because the irony in that situation is he was the one pushing for the now ruled unconstitutional Iowa Ag Gag Law. And with that in the back of my mind and everything I was dealing with at work on a daily basis is just seeing a system that kind of has no end of overcrowding, creates real prolapses in the pigs, obviously horrible conditions to live in, just in line with what Direct Action had seen at Senator Rosenboom's farm. Now, I'm not a legal expert, and I don't have all the resources and time to put into figuring out, is there a hard set Iowa DNR regulation to set a standard on how big these pigs can get before they need to move them out? For me, the moral standard is already way past, say, 90, 100, 130-pound pigs double-stocked in these barns. So I sent that email out to Direct Action Everywhere, and that was through their legal email, their legal team. And I was then forwarded to Matt, who then, through conversation, started talking about the situation that I was seeing. It quickly evolved as soon as COVID-19 started, causing issues with the United States pork and meat packing plant facilities. Employee shutdowns caused massive backups. Now, the issue I saw immediately was we've already got a backup system from a massive expansion by a company that has now been compounded by the issue of no places to put these pigs. Early talks kind of scared me about massive pig kill-offs of healthy pigs, pigs that now are being killed for no reason. The weight of that was pretty heavy, to be honest. You're seeing where we were removing pigs at work and things I was hearing from other industry professionals. I noticed that the reality of killing pigs was very much sooner than later. And the method to do that was for ventilation shutdown. Shut the pit fans off, shut the ventilation fans off, and heat up the building. Now, here we are with COVID-19, and that's what the plan is. And so with that, I got back a hold of Matt, let him know on the situation, and Direct Action Everywhere was able to do their thing, capture their footage that can actually show what's going on. All these pigs being killed. At first it was, you see it, and this is normal. It is what it is. This is the industry that we have. This is the industry that I've grown up around. My hometown, my home county, that is Iowa Select. That is big pork. After seeing it for so long, I wasn't, I guess, becoming numb to it. It was, I guess, just affecting me more and more every day on feeling the compassion and empathy with these animals that we were working with daily. I kind of started to question at what point does this business just, I guess at what point do the cons outweigh the pros with this? The profits versus the morality of the situation. Kind of long, deep thoughts while driving every day. You just have nothing better to do. So that's what I did. And that's, I guess, how I felt about that. It's because this industry encompasses everything that is home. Iowa Falls, Hardin County, Hampton, Grundy County. Everything around here is very based off of this very industry.